Let's jump into the Star Wars trail, because that's what everybody's talking about.
They were looking all over for a director, and I honestly didn't think J.J. Abrams would get it. He's one of my favorites. I mean, I love Lost. I love the Mission Impossibles that he's been involved with and directed. I love the Star Trek reboot. Pretty much everything that he's done.
But you didn't think he'd get it?
I just thought that was a little incestuous for the director, and probably for the director of Star Trek, because those two are so iconic, and they're probably the very peak mountain. The very, very snow-capped peak would be Star Trek and Star Wars. I mean,
they are.
Now have kind of spread out to other things. I mean, now they're just huge. Star Trek and Star Wars. The universes for those two. I always loved the concept, like Gene Roddenberry with Star Trek and George Lucas with Star Wars. It started from somebody's mind, kind of like a C.S. Lewis or a Tolkien. And something I always find really amazing when, liberal people start talking about pieces of the pie. I probably told you this before. One time I saw a 6 or 7-year-old kid sitting down, and he had a Star Wars T-shirt on, and he had an iPhone in his hand. And I thought, right there, that shatters, looking at the kid, shatters the pizza pie theory. Because Steve Jobs and George Lucas, those two people created jobs and wealth and prosperity and a legacy.
These concepts together in certain areas, and yet can compartmentalize their mind in other areas, like you were just describing. So everybody knows, clearly you don't have an economic pie. All you got to do is look at the Mac, the company. All you got to look at is IBM. All you got to look at is so many examples of just wealth being created and jobs being created and then splinter companies being created. But you don't even have to go to that level. You were originally getting at this, and I'm returning to your point. An idea. So think about this. An idea starts, right? It starts with just a simple idea. I mean, I'm a big Inklings fan. I'm a big Lewis fan, a Tolkien fan. And these guys were just sitting around a pub, and from that came universes that would inspire and then re-inspire. And then generations and generations would write spin-off literature and copycat literature. Multiple layers of this universe would be explored through literature, all from an idea, all from the seed of an idea. So clear this idea that we live in some sort of fixed universe, be it creatively or economically, is so absurd, and yet people can compartmentalize the fact that exists. What you just described, the Batman T-shirt wearing, Apple phone wielding kid can exist, and so can Marxist Keynesian economics. But in order to do that, you have to compartmentalize, and I've never personally been able to understand how people can do that. I've always been absolutely fascinated by that. And one more example is when I was in college, there was this football player who was playing for the school I went to. Now here's a kid, he's like 6'4", he's built like a Mack truck, he can run the 440 in like ridiculous time. And he's out there in the field, and every day he understands that there's disparity between human beings, talent, God-given gifts. So he understands that, right? He understands that displayed on the football field every day, that if you're 4'4", 100 pounds soaking wet, you're not going to perform on the field. That's just doesn't matter how many inequality speeches you get. That same kid turns around, sits in my sociology class, and spouts off, might as well be word for word French Revolution rhetoric about equality and this and that. And I just sit there with my mouth open thinking, how do you compartmentalize your world like that? You already know that doesn't exist, and yet they do it, Luke. They do it all the time. Some of the biggest lefties live in these Comic-Con universes, which actually reiterate our worldview over and over again. They do not follow the breadcrumb trail into actual tangible living. I don't know why. I've never been able to understand that.
They have the blinders on. They're just being intellectually dishonest.
How are we doing that then? I mean, what are we doing?
No, well, that's the point. We're not doing that. If you would do that, I think emotionally and mentally it would hurt, because the common sense from next door would start creeping in, and you wouldn't if you have to, it's almost like it's like journalism. If you get caught lying, your credibility has been shot across the board. It's kind of like that. Like if you choose to let yourself be intellectually dishonest in one way, then, I mean, you're making that choice, and it kind of ruins all of your credibility.
Yeah, no, I think that's very smart. I think that's what it is.
Conservatives are the only ones that do this. I mean, if you're conservative across the board, you're the only one. Now people like us, and I actually was thinking about this, like the stuff with Hillary and Bill, like I know, and even to some extent Obama, like I know for a fact a lot of it's satire, and a lot of it's not exactly fair. I choose to hold certain things, like the tip thing with Hillary, under a microscope, and choose to poke fun at that.
That's theater.
It's not exactly fair, but it's theater. But to be intellectually honest across the board, that's just you got to just be what's good for the goose is good for the gander. What's good for the, what's good for this side of the aisle has to be good for the other, and they don't play by those rules. But anyway, back to the movie, because we could follow this whole rabbit.
No, good rabbit trail. The Star Trek, Star Wars, tippity top of this sort of cultural evolution, which is sort of like this. What would you describe it as? Almost like fantasy fiction geek novel.
Yeah, geek becomes mainstream. I mean, now it's almost a novelty. It's like a cool thing. I mean, maybe it won't last forever, but it's kind of cool to be a geek. People wear that as a badge of honor. There are people who, like myself, who can mentally really enjoy those things, but at the same point in time, I don't let myself get lost in the subculture. I'd
go as far as to say that that's the average person.
Yeah, so maybe at this point with the films really help in any realm. It could be a biographical film, or it could be a historical film, or it could be a fiction film about lightsabers. Films really help mainstream an idea or a concept. So for comic books for the last 15 years, I would say going back into the 90s with X-Men, here or there, maybe even before that, a lot of comic book passion has become mainstream, especially with the way they do films and the budgets that these films have now and the followings. Kids don't have any sort of stigma or shame about caring about these characters. They may not even know that they came from comic books. They just know that they're really cool stories. In this case, we're talking about Star Trek and Star Wars, but you can talk about comic book movies too. But they have such a rich history that's why the films work, because you're developing a character, you have a history of this universe, and you have so much to pull from. So anyway, back to the J.J. Abrams thing. Yeah, so I just didn't think that, even as much as I liked him, on the whole kind of speculation of who's going to helm the next Star Wars, which seems like years and years ago. I can't believe it was only a couple of years ago now, but and the film's coming out at Christmas. Is that when I did hear that he, took the reins, I was a little disappointed, because I thought, well, now who knows what's going to happen with Star Trek, and I thought they did such an awesome job with that. But I was a little satisfied, because I do like Star Wars, and I was not a huge fan of episode 1 and 2. I thought 3 was pretty good, but episode 1 and 2 I thought was rubbish. But, I agree. They gave us something, and they gave us, Darth Maul was a cool character, and Qui-Gon Jinn, and young Obi-Wan, cool things and cool visuals, but overall not as good as 4, 5, and 6. But, so J.J. Abrams took over, and I just knew, even from the marketing, even from his behind the scenes, I just knew it was going to be right. And then you get this really awesome kind of thing that I've been thinking about, and most fans have been thinking about since they were a kid, which is to bring back all the characters. Now, chances are these characters won't stay for the next 3 films; they'll get killed off, or won't be in the films in a large capacity. But to bring back everybody: Chewie, Han Solo, Princess Leia, Luke. I'd probably even Lando Calrissian, and that remains to be seen, but I wouldn't be surprised if he came back. R2-D2, C-3PO. I mean, all the ones that from the movies that we grew up with, they're all coming back.
Star Wars never really hit me as much, and it's kind of ironic, because if you want to just real quick parallel with politics again, I think Star Wars is a much more advantageous depiction of my worldview than is Star Trek, but I've always been drawn to Star Trek. Now, you want to talk about some Freudian stuff there. I've always been drawn to Star Trek. I think Star Trek is much more like a socialist utopia, and I think Star Wars is more good, evil, dark, light.
Because you're saying because in Star Trek it's very socialistic.
It's very socialistic, and the ideas that are being pushed are very, very, I think, are very, very utopian and very, very socialist, economic, social, so on and so forth. But that universe captivated me for whatever reason, be it the characters, the plot.
It's great stories.
But Star Wars did, which is really, really interesting. But I only say that because you mentioned the handling of this director, J.J. Abrams, and this guy, what I think is interesting as I was listening to you, is he just must be so trusted in this universe of Hollywood where everything is lack of trust. But this guy has proven on so many different corners. He's done everything. He's done everything, this guy. I mean, there's nothing he hasn't succeeded at doing. It's just amazing that they would give him both of these universes. And it just speaks to the creative trust that people have in both fans and, department heads and stuff like that. I mean, they just think this guy's going to get it done. That in and of itself is sort of fascinating to me. You were mentioning how you were a little bit apprehensive about it, but that must be the reason, right? That must be the reason they gave him the reins, because he's just proven that he doesn't fail. And then he treats these things with
that's the thing is, even though they were huge the movies themselves, 1, 2, and 3 were huge financial success. Star Wars made good money. That's not the issue. The issue is that people didn't like the way they turned out.
The fans were hugely disappointed.
It's such a big part people's lives. I know really hardcore, staunch atheists who have passion and hatred of God, who love science fiction like a born again Christian loves communion. They just love it, and it's so funny. I don't know where the parallel is in there, but it's got to be in there somewhere because it's way too big of a coincidence.
It gives your soul the water and the food that it requires vicariously. So you don't have to do business with actual philosophy. You still get the taste and touch of those things that
you get church, you get community, you get something you're passionate about. It's across the board. There's people who really love professional sports too.
Perfect example. Professional sports is another example of that. Exactly.
If you're one of those paint face fans, it's at that level. Average fan probably is not at that level. But that's
not a category. That should be a category. The paint face fan. I haven't heard that.
Yeah, I took my shirt off and me and my 6 buddies fell out. Whatever. Yeah, that's the kind of fan that in a different realm goes to Comic-Con and has spent 6 months.
No, it's so true because it's interesting too in and of itself because the one is like a Jon Stewart joke and the other is just seemed that's like your dad and your uncle. Who are both accountants on a Sunday. It's just interesting that one degree of just total crazy fandom is deemed totally acceptable by society, and the other is like, you're probably not going to get a girlfriend, and your boss might think about like letting you go.
Long live the new media. CollegeCountry.net